どうか私の口の言葉が身胸にかない心の思いが見前に置かれますように。主よ、私の岩、私のあがい主よ。May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts always be delightful in your sight, O God, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. We're still working our way through the Sermon on the Mount, which Jesus is delivering to his disciples. Jesus has a lot of wisdom for us here, as last time. We hear that he has not come to abolish the law or the prophets, that those who ignore the law will be called least in the kingdom of heaven, and unless one's righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, they will never enter. This all shows us that Jesus is operating in the same sphere as the Pharisees, and may himself be a Pharisee. The constant verbal sparring between Jesus and these other learned fellows is something we'll later see documented in the Talmud, as we talked about some time ago. Matthew did not believe Jesus was creating something brand new. He was standing firmly in his inherited tradition of Judaism. He saw himself as fulfilling the law. With regard to righteousness, of course, as Christians, we shouldn't think that being good and righteous people is optional. But Matthew seems pretty unbending here, maybe a little intimidating. It's helpful to remember that Matthew was writing to a community that found itself at odds with the Roman Empire and the other cultures existing around it. He's clearly taking a defensive posture. His stories are so often about who's in and who's out, who's right and who's wrong. This puts him in contrast to Luke, who is trying to ingratiate his fellow Christians to empire for the church's expansion and protection, and has a much more open and gracious posture. Neither is better than the other, they just had different communities with different priorities. Matthew sometimes provides a helpful emphasis on the high cost of the Jesus path that we might need to hear. But his concern about our perfection and righteousness is born out of providing comfort to people who were losing everything. As Christians, we do not often have the same situation, certainly not here in Canada, although in other parts of the world, they definitely still do. So these parts of the passage we just read were pretty self-explanatory when we looked at them in our Tuesday Japanese Bible study. But the opening part of the passage was a little harder. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. What does this mean? We were all thinking. The salt was confusing enough. In English, we do have this phrase, salt of the earth, to describe a good and righteous person who is usually humble and, I would argue, often subtly understood to maybe be not terribly highly educated. But this phrase came to English from this story. So what could Jesus have meant in its original understanding? Well, in my research this week, I learned that salt is not only a preservative, but was and still is used in many ancient and modern cultures as a ritual purifier. Shinto practitioners often use salt to purify an area before beginning a ritual. And many restaurants in Japan and other parts of Asia have bowls or offerings of salt out front to attract customers and keep out bad spirits and negative energy. Salt cleanses and protects, both physically and spiritually. So this is something disciples are called to be and do. This might help us with that comparison. But what about the light of the world? First of all, in our study, we all took notice right away of Jesus calling us the light of the world, in contrast to the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verse 12, where he says, I am the light of the world. It's an interesting contradiction. Maybe. Is it a contradiction? For me, there were two things that came to mind here when I read this. For the first one, let me tell you a little story. There's a beautiful epic poem composed by a 12th century proto-Sufi poet in Iran, whose pen name was Attar. This poem is called The Conference of the Birds in English, and it details the journey of all the world's birds as they seek the mythical Simorg, which is a bit like a phoenix, to be their king. They are led on the journey by the hoopoe bird, a teacher figure who guides them with his wisdom and passion. The poem is meant to be an allegory of the soul's restless and difficult search for God. It's a beautiful story that speaks very intimately to the human spiritual experience, even today. What the birds discover when the ragged remnant finally reach their destination is that, spoiler alert, due to a clever bit of wordplay that works in Persian but not in English, there's no separation between them and the great Simorg. They are the very treasure, the very sovereign that they seek. It then becomes a story of the mystical experience of God, the divine annihilation of the self, experienced by saints like Francis, Teresa, and John of the Cross. This is what I was thinking of as I read Jesus telling his beloved disciples, "You are the light of the world." Just as he is, so he is calling us to be, inviting us into full unity. The writer of John's gospel also understands this, later having Jesus say to God in prayer, "All mine are yours, and yours are mine, and I have been glorified in them." His desire throughout that gospel is that the disciples follow him in his words and actions completely. It might seem a bit fanciful, and I thought so too, until I read this line of the Isaiah passage assigned to this week. "Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and God will say, 'Here I am.'" I checked the Hebrew to be sure. "Here I am" is hineni. This is the same phrase Abraham and Moses both use to answer when God calls upon them. "Abraham, Abraham, hineni, here I am." After untold carnage and devastation, God promises in this passage to be present to us, using the very words that we ourselves use in a divine mirroring. God does not desire separation between us. God desires union. God desires wholeness. Being Trinity yet undivided, God is capable of being manifest in many parts, yet always and forever one undivided whole. I am the light of the world, you are the light of the world. I am the protector and the purifier, you are the salt of the earth. What does this mean for us, positioned on the far side of resurrection? It means the whole world has been redeemed in Jesus' grand act of return and renewal. As the old hymn says, "All shall be well, the sacrifice is made, the sinner freed, the price of pardon paid." There is no separation. We are one in the Spirit and one in the Lord, with God and with one another. We are salt and light, two things which an old seminary mate always noticed are silent. They don't make any sound. If we already are, then we must do our best to act like it, whatever that looks like for each individual and for the church as a whole. Purifier, sanctifier, preserver, revelation. These are all things we are called to be. It probably takes a lifetime to figure out how. But as a most treasured elder at the cathedral always says to me, with God's help I can, with God's help I will. Let's end with a tiny passage from the Conference of the Birds, as translated by the Iranian poet and author Sholeh Volpi. If you indeed love, then ask for the Almighty's love too. Don't let go of that desire. No doubt the beloved will claim your heart. That ocean possessor only asks of you a single drop.